It started with a raised voice, then silence, then something none of them would ever forget. The morning rush at Maple Oak Cafe was in full swing. Orders were flying across the counter. The scent of espresso hung in the air. Baristas scribbled names on cups, and regulars flipped open laptops as the quiet hum of jazz played overhead. But no one noticed the man sitting in the corner, not at first. He was older, in his late 60s, wearing a worn army green jacket and a black baseball cap with gold embroidery that read, U.S. Army Retired. One of his legs rested stiffly out to the side, his boot strapped to a brace. A cane leaned against the wall beside him. He had a soft, weathered face and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. But what stood out most was how still he sat, like he wasn't just resting, but holding himself together. Across the room, a man in a business suit was trying to juggle two phones, a laptop bag, and a lukewarm latte. He turned quickly and stumbled, spilling his coffee across the floor and splashing near the older man's boots. The veteran didn't react, just flinched slightly, as if waiting for something worse. The businessman glanced down and scowled. Seriously? You couldn't move your leg just a little? The cafe went quiet. The veteran looked up slowly. It doesn't move much anymore, he said simply. The man scoffed. Right. Of course. Bet you expect me to clean it up for you too. No one laughed. No one came to the veteran's defense. Not yet. The barista behind the counter looked stunned. A college student near the window pulled out her phone, unsure whether to record or speak up. But the businessman was already walking away, mumbling something about entitled freeloaders and people faking injuries for sympathy. The veteran said nothing. He just looked down at his hands. Quiet, tired. Then came the sound that changed everything. Ding. A notification. Then another. Ding. 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 One by one, phones in the cafe started lighting up. Notifications, messages, social media alerts. It was like a digital ripple through the room. At first, people thought it was a glitch. Some checked their screens, others frowned. But within seconds, a woman gasped. Oh my God, that's him. A man near the counter whispered, Wait, is this real? One by one, they looked at their phones and at the veteran in the corner, because the same photo had just gone viral. A younger version of the same man, in full combat uniform, carrying a wounded soldier on his back, in the middle of a war zone. Covered in dust, eyes focused, bravery frozen in time. The caption read, This is Staff Sergeant Harold Connors. He saved 14 men in Afghanistan during a surprise ambush. He's never once spoken about it. He earned a silver star. And today, he was just yelled at in a cafe. Silence fell over the cafe again. But this time, it was different, because now they knew, and the man who had been invisible just moments ago was suddenly at the center of the room. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire cafe had been dropped into stillness, every heartbeat louder than the soft jazz playing overhead. All eyes turned to the man in the corner, Staff Sergeant Harold Connors, who still hadn't touched his lukewarm coffee. He didn't look up, not when the barista stepped out from behind the counter, not when the college student quietly slid her phone into her pocket, not even when a couple approached him, slowly holding hands and staring like they were seeing a ghost from history come to life. Finally, the barista broke the silence. Sir? I had no idea, she said gently, her voice trembling. Please, let me replace your coffee on the house. And if you'd like anything to eat. Harold looked up slowly. His eyes were kind but tired. It's all right, he said. I didn't come here to be noticed. The businessman who had snapped at him was standing at the far end of the cafe, frozen. The realization was written across his face. Guilt, shock, embarrassment. But he didn't speak. He didn't move. Harold didn't look at him. Instead, he pulled his hat off, ran a hand through his thin white hair, and placed the cap in his lap. I just like the quiet here, he said. Gets me through the mornings. The college student stepped forward next. Mr. Connors, she said softly. My brother served. He didn't make it home, but I think he would have liked you. Harold gave her a faint smile. Then he was a brave man. The cafe was slowly filling with something powerful, not just remorse, but reverence. Customers who hadn't even witnessed the earlier moment were now reading the story on their phones, eyes widening as they connected the photo to the man just a few feet away. And then the cafe owner came out from the back. She was older with silver hair pulled into a bun and reading glasses hanging around her neck. When she saw Harold, her breath caught. Harry? He looked up. Elaine, he said, startled. She hurried to his table, tears welling in her eyes. I thought you moved out of state. I haven't seen you since Charlie's funeral? He finished softly. Yeah. Elaine pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of his shoulder. Charlie had been her husband, a fellow soldier, and Harold had carried him out of a fire zone during the war, back when they were just boys, with boots and bravery, not leg braces, and silver hair. I didn't know you came here, she said. I didn't want to make a fuss, he replied. Well, she whispered, you deserve 1,000 of them. By now, the cafe was a different place. The businessman had quietly slipped out, his eyes down, avoiding every gaze on his way through the door. No one said a word to stop him. He wasn't the story anymore. Harold was. One by one, people came forward, not to crowd him, not to take photos, but just to say thank you, to shake his hand, to ask if he needed anything. Someone offered to pay for his groceries. A teenager asked if he could sit and just talk with him for a few minutes. Harold, for his part, stayed humble, gracious, a little overwhelmed. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered under his breath, but someone nearby said gently, it's been supposed to happen for a long time. Today, just caught up to it. By the time noon rolled around, the entire street, outside Maple Oak Cafe, buzzed with murmurs and camera flashes. Reporters had started to gather. Someone had tipped off a local news station. A segment producer was already trying to confirm that the man sitting quietly near the cafe's corner window was indeed the same Staff Sergeant Harold Connors who had gone viral overnight. Inside, Harold sipped a fresh cup of coffee. The barista had replaced it 3 times, now each cup untouched until the previous one had gone cold. But this time he actually drank, not because he wanted attention, not because of the growing crowd outside, but because a kid, maybe 10 or 11, had walked in just moments earlier with a shaky smile and said, my dad says you're a real hero. And I think so too. He handed Harold a crayon drawing of a soldier, standing tall beneath an American flag, holding a cane in one hand and saluting with the other. The stick figure even had a little gold star on its chest. Harold folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Thank your dad for me, he said. The cafe owner, Elaine, hovered nearby, speaking quietly with a couple of reporters. She wasn't letting anyone shove microphones into Harold's face, but she could see this story had outgrown the 4 walls of her cafe. When she returned to his table, she asked gently, would you be okay saying something? Just once, before this turns into a circus. Harold looked up from his coffee. I didn't come here to give speeches, he said. I know, Elaine replied. But you came here with dignity, and someone tried to take that away from you. Maybe you don't need to speak for you. Maybe you need to speak for the others who didn't come back, and the ones who came back broken. That gave Harold pause. He looked out the window where the camera crews were setting up across the street. He could feel the weight of it all pressing on his chest, not the pressure to be a symbol, but the pain of knowing how often people like him were overlooked until it was too late. He glanced down at the crayon drawing in his pocket, then at the photo on someone's phone that had started all this. His younger self, all grit and fire and fight frozen in time, as he carried another man through the smoke. That moment had never defined him. It had haunted him. But now maybe it could serve a different purpose. He looked back up at Elaine and nodded. "I'll speak." A few minutes later, she stepped outside and signaled to the reporters. One short statement, she said firmly. No questions. Inside, Harold rose, with the help of his cane, straightened his jacket, and stood just outside the cafe door. As a hush fell over the growing crowd, cameras clicked, phones rose. He cleared his throat. His voice was steady, if a little rough, from years of disuse. "I didn't come here today to be seen. I came for a coffee, same as anyone else. I've lived long enough to know that not everyone sees you when you walk in the room. Sometimes they see what they expect to see." He paused. "I served this country not for applause and not for special treatment. I served because I believed in protecting people, all people. That doesn't stop when you take off the uniform." Another pause. "And sometimes people make assumptions. They lash out. They forget their manners. I've seen worse in my time, so I don't carry grudges. But if this moment reminds anyone of something, let it be this: you never know someone's story. And kindness costs you nothing." The crowd stood still, then a single clap, then another, and then the whole street was applauding, not because he'd gone viral, but because in the face of cruelty, he'd chosen dignity. Again, just like he had years ago, on a battlefield thousands of miles away. By evening, the story had made national headlines. TV anchors were reading Harold's words aloud during prime time. "Kindness cost you nothing" was suddenly trending, printed on shirts, posted in windows, and shared with hashtags across every platform. But Harold didn't go home to watch any of it. Instead, he stayed at the cafe with Elaine after the doors were locked and the last customer had trickled out. She brought him a warm sandwich and sat down across from him like they used to do years ago, back when he and Charlie were young, full of energy, and still figuring life out after the war. "You know," Elaine said, stirring her tea, "Charlie always said you were the best of them." Harold smiled faintly. "Charlie had bad judgment." "No. Charlie had heart. And he saw yours even when you couldn't." Harold nodded, not speaking for a long time. He finally said, "It's strange. I've done things I've never talked about, hard things, painful things. But it wasn't until someone shouted at me in a cafe that the world decided I mattered." Elaine looked at him kindly. "Sometimes the smallest injustice reveals the deepest truth." The next day, Harold woke to find his mailbox full. Letters, cards, donations, notes from children, emails from veterans groups, a letter from a high school civics teacher who wanted to use his story as a lesson in compassion and courage. But it was one message in particular that stopped him cold. It was from a man named Eric, a familiar name, the same man who had shouted at him in the cafe. His email was short, honest, and gutting. "Mr. Connors, I don't deserve a response, but I owe you one. I was having a horrible day, but that's no excuse. The moment I saw your face on the news, I felt sick. I looked into your history, what you've done. I didn't just make a mistake. I made you feel small, and I'll carry that with me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm changing. You made me see what I hadn't seen in myself. Thank you for saving lives, and thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed. Eric." Harold read it twice. He didn't reply. Not because he was angry, but because for once, silence felt powerful enough. Later that afternoon, Elaine called. A veterans nonprofit wanted to name a scholarship in Harold's honor. It would go toward helping disabled vets return to school or start new careers after service. They'd already raised $40,000 in less than 24 hours. Harold chuckled when she told him. "All this because a guy got mad at my leg." Elaine laughed too. "No. All this because you showed the world who you really are. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lash out. You stood tall." Harold didn't want a legacy built on viral fame. But if something good could grow from a moment that had hurt, if some student or young soldier or burned-out civilian could find hope in the way he handled it, then maybe that moment had meaning after all. And deep down, he knew. This wasn't about redemption for one man. It was about reflection for many. The following Sunday, Harold stood quietly outside Maple Oak Cafe. The morning sun cut through the trees, casting golden lines across the sidewalk. There was a new plaque by the front entrance, mounted near the doorframe. Elaine had unveiled it, just minutes before her voice catching, as she read the inscription aloud. In honor of Staff Sergeant Harold Connors, for his service, his dignity, and his reminder to the world, kindness costs you nothing. The cafe had changed since that day, not in decor, not in menu, but in spirit. Locals called it the place where it happened, but more than that, it became a gathering spot where people tried a little harder, held doors, greeted strangers, thought twice before judging someone too quickly. Inside, Harold sat at his usual corner seat. This time the seat across from him wasn't empty. A young man, early 20s, fresh out of community college, had asked to join him. He was the recipient of the first Harold Connors Veterans Scholarship. His name was Eli, and his father had served too. "I just wanted to thank you, Sir," Eli said, nervous but grateful. Harold waved off the "sir." "Just Harold," he said. "And you're the one doing the hard work now." They spoke for over an hour. About service, about sacrifice, about what it means to live quietly with things no one else understands. Harold didn't offer advice, just presence. That was enough. By early afternoon, more people had begun to drop in. One family brought their son, who had drawn another picture. This one of Harold, sitting in the cafe smiling with a cape over his shoulders. "You're a superhero," the boy whispered. Harold chuckled. Not quite. But the truth was, in a world that too often raced past people like him, a world that overlooked those who'd carried it on their backs, Harold had become a new kind of hero. Not because of a war, not because of a medal, but because when someone tried to humiliate him, he responded not with fury, but with quiet strength. Because his silence spoke louder than any insult. Because his grace made everyone pause. As the sun began to dip and the cafe prepared to close, Harold stood once more outside the door. Elaine joined him, arms folded, both watching the last of the day's guests trickle out, with coffee cups and warm words. "You changed something here, you know," she said. Harold shook his head. "No. People change themselves. I just gave them a moment." Elaine smiled. And then, as if on cue, someone's phone buzzed behind them. A message, a tag. A post about Harold's scholarship had just been shared again, this time by a famous actor. The caption was simple: "Be more like him." Harold sighed. "Still ringing," he said. Elaine grinned. "You better get used to it." But Harold didn't care for the noise, the spotlight, or the buzz. He just hoped that tomorrow, and the day after that, someone somewhere would move a little slower, speak a little softer, and remember that everyone carries something, and maybe, just maybe, they'd offer kindness first.